Anybody else doesn't have a Oh, there's actually some people's in here. We need to.
I think that's the gentleman that sits up here in the front. I can't ever remember.
Mark?
Mark.
Yes. He's antisocial. It's hard to figure him out.
I don't remember names.
Well, I have too.
Need some change or something?
Sit way over here. Yeah.
Anybody else need one? You guys got y'all's? Got two. Okay.
So I'm working 5 days a week, keeping them babies.
Putting it back in there only confuses me even more.
No.
Is that Jeff Dabbs over there? Oh, that's son. I knew it had to be
Don't
something.
tell me he was asking for me.
No. I told Tara we'll round her up for wearing a t-shirt to church. Around when we just don't do that kind of stuff.
Cause I got two.
We don't do that.
She's, you know, they're close together. They're a lot right now.
There you go.
And, you don't want to keep on 5 days.
What is it, Dorsey?
That's what I'm
What's the red in his mouth? I just quit listening to him talk. I'm sick and tired.
Tell them about t-shirts.
Do I?
Tell them about t-shirts.
T-shirts are not.
They're
not
not
holy.
one, and he's wearing one.
Yeah, I didn't know you had them on.
Jordans are holy.
And so,
Not true. That is not true. There you go.
I had to give him a bath.
It's 9:07. Kristen's already here. We're ready to get going, you know?
Jeff was home, and so he helped the baby out. Me and
Let's
Jason
see. All right. So I hope that in your free time this week you had an opportunity to read and catch up on Esther a little bit. I love somewhat of the simplicity of the storyline and how we feel like we have a good grasp of it. But man, just there's so many visual things going on in that first chapter. That you got a book? You need a book?
I got a book.
Okay. You hope to read it to you since Lisa isn't here?
Yeah. I was hoping you'd give me one
We
with
both in
pictures.
trouble.
Put your finger underneath the words one.
We're both in trouble.
Looks like you would know
I
by
need
now.
somebody to
Give me
read
one
both
with
of
pictures.
them.
I don't follow along very well.
There's a couple pictures in this actually. Not like picture, but there's like pretty things on the
Oh,
side. Anyway, Christy Dabbs actually told me she likes the fancy picture things already in there, so that's what we went with this time. Very good. So, a couple things to keep in mind.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, isn't that pretty?
That is not a picture.
It's kind of a picture.
That's good.
What do you think that is?
Doodling.
Doodlings? Pictures.
Doodling.
Moving on. Already know what pictures are. A couple things to remember and continue to pray for are Jason Cantrell's ministry, ATL's Voice. I just wanted to remind you again, you can follow it online, social media, all kinds of different ways of following that. And then the other thing, keep in mind our NASB Pew Bible Ministry. We're taking up a collection to try to fill the sanctuary with NASB Bibles for our guests and for us. The convenience of looking at it, looking at the words on the screen, the words that Jeff's talking about is very nice. I feel like it's not confusing. Although in this class we do exactly the opposite of that. I'll tell you what it says in the NIV, the CSB, confuse you as much as possible. But I do feel like deep Bible study. I think that's okay. But I do like just on the level in the sanctuary, everything being on the same page makes it easier. I think so. Again, I want to encourage you to relax this morning. I feel like that is the way to come into this environment. If we come into this relaxed, we look at this as our own personal Bible study. Although we're in here corporately, you just thinking all about yourself. Just pretend you're Tara for a second. Only think of yourself. And that's pretty good, right? It's on the spur of the moment.
Yeah, we know that happens a lot.
Let me tell you, she always teases me that I only have old man jokes, She's like, you're so old. Everything I say, And I had that guy at La Paria the other night. We had a waiter. I was killing it. He was like, man, this guy's funny, And I'm like,
He was
this
working
guy.
on his tail.
Yeah.
No, that's what she said. I'm not believing that. I think I was very funny. I had some good jokes.
He literally is paid to laugh at your jokes.
Yep. He's hoping if he laughs, he's gonna be
Yeah.
paid.
It worked, and I tipped him a bunch. Anyway, moving on.
I can imagine what he was saying when he got to the kitchen.
Yeah.
He's like, I got that old man.
Probably
Jones.
didn't even make it, he probably spoke Spanish going,
Yeah.
to get
One
you to
time
Wes
this
just
guy
didn't know what he said.
Right.
He was talking to Wes about how good he smelled, and like.
No.
That don't sound like he's laughing at your
Run into that sometimes, you know? Hey.
He was, what's the nice way to put it? I don't wanna say
Did Wes have a
full
skinny
accent.
jeans on?
I don't know, this is like hot dog, and Wes was like eating it up, I was like, Wes, dude.
Like, this guy's the
you
best
just
waiter
don't
we've
even
ever had.
know.
Dan was trying not to laugh at that. He knew that was funny. That was good.
You take it as a compliment when another guy tells you you smell good.
I know.
I just roll with it. I'm used to it, you know? It's all right.
Yeah.
They're not getting a tip from me, so that kinda leads me, I don't know about this.
That makes me really uncomfortable.
Yeah. They're not giving a
That was my
tip.
weekly back. That's right. That's good. That is funny.
I'm glad Tara was there to translate for you.
He like doesn't pick up on things at all.
We know he was looking for Molly, so. His friend Molly.
Moving on,
Okay, moving
back
on.
to God. I hope that we're in an environment we've created for ourselves in our own minds, been able to block out distractions, focus on His Word, really immerse ourselves in the details of the text. Because man, we have so many. Last week we covered so much of the background. We talked about King Ahasuerus and his royal throne and his pomp and his splendor. We talked about the Greeks calling him Xerxes. And I'm probably just going to refer to him as Ahasuerus at this point, just because we're in the ESV. It's all about that. If we're in the LSB or something else, they call him only Xerxes. So it's kind of however you want to call him. But they're in the Acropolis in Susa, which is the capital of the world. The whole Persian Empire moved there, from Persepolis to Susa, and in the third year, that's where he reigns from. That's where he reigns and he rules the world. All of the known world bows the knee to King Xerxes, to King Ahasuerus. Many years before this, the king of Assyria declares himself the King of Kings, which is the name Christians are very familiar with, And at that point, whoever defeated the king of Assyria was the King of Kings, So when in our later versions of the Old Testament and our later books of the Old Testament and the New Testament, as we call Jesus the King of Kings, what we're doing is we're coming back at that time. We're saying, you're not the King of Kings, we're the King of Kings. But during his life, Ahasuerus would have been the King of Kings. That would have been, I also gave you this other title of the Ruler of Heroes, which is, man, you're the Ruler of Heroes and you're the King of Kings. Pretty tough. But yeah, so that as the kings, as Babylon defeats Assyria, as the Medo-Persians beat Babylon, that leader, Nebuchadnezzar, and then Cyrus, they become the King of Kings. So at this point, that title is Ahasuerus's. And the story starts in the third year of his reign, 483 BC. We're in the Acropolis, we're in Susa, the citadel or the fortress is another good translation, in a place that was known as the Palace of Darius. Darius started it, he ended up dying before it was built, and Ahasuerus completes it and builds it. It says he's got 127 governors, which according to history books would have been quite a large difference from the amount of actual governors that they had. And then they also have a 180-day banquet. And these two numbers are just so big. They're unfathomable numbers. To give you an idea of how we're talking at this point. Unrelatable for a Jew. These things are just alien to them. 180-day banquet, 180-day feast of just eating and drinking, and it's half a year, half a solar year, which we talked about. The Persians are the ones who they adapt the solar year, which we have. The Jews never adapted it; they're still with the lunar calendar. So when we're wondering, hey, why do these people not have the same calendar as us? It's because some people go by the sun, some people go by the moon. There you go, little is that science? Maybe it's a little science there or something. But these are foreigners. The way this person tells the story, these are foreigners. We're using foreign terms. We talked about the nobles, the governors of the provinces, the throne, the feast, the citadel. None of these are Jewish terms. These are all Persian words. words, and they're all dated Persian words, with the layer of this unidentifiable, that's not us. That's the way these words are written. I love to look at them as some of them are actually misspelled. These are not our words. This is a Persian throne. This is not a throne that we would talk about. To use the nobles and governors met in the citadel, using only Persian words to describe it, you're showing this level of distaste for it. Yeah, there is this thick distaste for all of these things in the author's words here. And in verse 3, the Persian word for freeholders is translated into army. It's translated power in the KJV, but it is another Persian loanword. There's so many in this beginning here. From a Jew to use a Persian word like that is pointing out this, I like the word dark humor, but it is this disconnection from it. That's not me, you know? For me, one way I like to look at this, and I think everybody in here can connect, is as parents, we hear teenage slang words, and we may even use them to mock the teenagers, I'm sure, yeah, Tracy's shaking her head immediately, exactly. As soon as I hear you use some crazy word, you're gonna text me, a bunch of abbreviated words all scrambled into this, like what does even this mean, So to talk about that, in 2023, where these slang words or phrases are used all the time, now the advantage for parents is they can see them on social media, and so they see these words and then they misuse them or use them in a way of mocking them. It's very similar. Here is I'm gonna start off with the parent word slang test. Parent slang word test, yes. Here's your test. You ready? Dorsey's got all these. Anybody heard the term, it's giving? I'm gonna use it in context.
What?
It's giving.
We don't have a teenager.
Yeah, you will. There'll be different words by the time you get there, though. I'm just gonna warn you.
We're out of the loop right
How
now.
about her outfit is giving? You heard this? Yeah.
I hope has.
Yes. Okay. One
She's
winner.
got teenagers.
You mean it looks good?
That's exactly. In this context, giving is used on its own and carries a positive connotation. The subject's outfit is being complimented. But in another sense, you could say her outfit is giving 2012. So, in that see, nobody even knows you guys are so old. But anyway, in this context, the subject's outfit is being compared to an outfit that might have been cool in 2012.
Yeah.
That is a negative connotation. It's giving can be used as a way to compare something.
We could come right back to him and go, oh, the outfit is so rad. And they would be like,
Rad, yes.
Yeah.
they would be like, what
That's
is
true.
that?
That's right.
But if they used rad against you, that would have that level of sarcasm to it. That's what I'm saying. Oh, that's totally awesome, dude.
Yeah.
A teenager says that, they're making fun of you. One of my favorites is, which I've used this one against teenagers many times so far, is lit.
Oh, yeah.
We're not talking about a fire, Dorsey. Get a little bit. Situation one context is, that concert was so lit. If any of my kids ever watch this, they're gonna be like, what in the world? It's an adjective to describe a fun, high energy situation. Or, at the same time, you can misuse it again as, I got lit last night. Now in that context, there's a different meaning there. And yeah, no, that's right. There's still high energy involved, but it could refer to someone who is intoxicated. So, getting lit. I don't know where these words come from. Here's a common one that I think everybody's probably heard is ghost. Ghost in 2023 is a common slang word used by teenagers. I'll use it in context here. Can you believe he ghosted me after our third date? In that context is someone is to stop replying to their texts or calls, often without explanation. They're there, and they just ghost. Very funny. I got one more. I got a couple more, but this was a very good one for me. I did not know this one. Has anybody ever heard the word touch grass? Touch grass. No, I like this game. It's very funny for me.
used to say that all the time.
Yeah, of course. I'll give you a context here. Did you see his hot take on TikTok? Yeah, he needs to touch grass.
Cut grass. Go cut grass.
Okay, what is that?
That means no need to knock it out?
Oh,
No?
touch grass.
Oh, that's it. That's right. He needs to be in the real world. That's good. Yeah, he needs to touch grass. He needs to get
That's gonna be my
offline.
new one.
Needs to
I like
yeah,
that one.
you guys like that one? Use that one. That's good. Okay. touch grass, it said people who spend too much time online can benefit from going outside.
I learned
Here's one that I think Tara actually uses. I don't even know what's even going on with this, but sleep on. The term of sleep on, people have really been sleeping on this new song. It's very funny. So to sleep on something is to ignore or dismiss its value. They've been sleeping on Esther, you know. Anyway, I don't know.
That does sound right.
Those are some. Yeah, I may not be using them exactly right.
And you look at them like.
That's it. That's right.
But they don't know the old saying.
But when you hear it, let's just say,
That's
and then you use it back to them, even a little bit off, to point out how much you don't like it, the distaste you have for it, is exactly where we're at here with these Persian words. When they say that your nobles and your governors and your provinces, and they're using their words, and they're kind of missaying it, that's what they're doing here. So they're saying, you know, he's trying to sleep on this, what you guys getting lit, you know, whatever they're saying.
You need to touch the grass.
Yeah, you need to touch grass, bro. Anyway, the author has in the first four verses this thick sarcasm. He has this distaste for the Persian world in general. He's creating this us versus them scene. So that's kind of what we're going into today. We'll open with a prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for bringing us here this morning. We ask that you bless our time together, challenge and change us this morning. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. So, although we already covered those first four verses, like we just reviewed for 20 minutes, that was a little too long. But as we come into today's, I thought we'd reread through them. It sets up the next verses. So we'll read the first 12 verses. The ESV holds the first 12 as the first paragraph. Some people hold the first 9. You know, I'm all into where the paragraph breaks are. It's just an opinion. So we'll start off here with the king's banquet. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media, and the nobles and the governors of the provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king, and drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. King Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. At this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. Okay, so we have a very well-known story. We've heard that all of our lives probably, in Sunday school and in sermons. So many details in there that I feel like we really just glance over and see them as secondary when they're so important. Hopefully we can knock out some of those this morning. Last week we talked about verses 1 through 4, and then verse 5 starts with this second feast. Upon completing the 180-day feast, let's have another. You know, that's what you're gonna do. You know, when those days were completed, when the royal feasting was finished, the king gave for all the people, is the ESV translation there. This is a week-long party for the general populace, for the common person, the commoners I like. You know, even the lowest of the lows is allowed to this if you live in Susa. And now if you live inside the gates of Susa, that's a whole nother conversation, but it is somewhat of a, you're not like, you know, the lowest of the lows, but you're in Susa. So, everyone who is of something in Susa is at this party. For 7 days. It's a very big disconnect for me. I don't know, it just seems like, that's like a ridiculous number, but yet we just had a party that was 180 days, so I don't know why 7's so ridiculous, but the first thing we note is it's held in a different place. The court of the garden of the king's palace. I love the translation of it's in the pavilion. It's a small luxury structure. The word that's translated here is it's an independent architectural unit for the use of the king or the heir apparent. An open structure, probably a colonnaded open hall. Susa was extremely hot in the summer, extremely. Almost all of our story is always going to take place in the winter because it's almost the only time you can go outside. It is very hot there. The architecture of Susa was developed in a way to where they would use the wind. So if this was an outside colonnaded pavilion, it was using the wind to its advantage. You know, it's funny how for me architecture and things like that, engineering, civil engineering, all those things in these days was far more advanced than what we have now. You know, my favorite joke on that is you look at the roads, you know, in Rome that are still there. We had roads like 5 years ago that are potholed and they're terrible. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But they would use the breeze. I like that. They're outside. They're not inside. Either the king didn't want them, didn't want to give the commoners access to the palace, or there were so many of them that they had to do it outside. You know, it's not known. You know, but they know that it's outside. The garden with its pavilion is still going to be a scene. This is still a royal scene of luxury, and the descriptors that we have here talking about this party are just lavish, exotic. I don't have enough descriptor words there, but an unasked, unaddressed question before I go into this next verse, though, it pops in my head every single time I read verse 6. It starts talking about these specific things. It's like, who wrote this? You know, like we haven't even talked about that. I find it very interesting. Who wrote Esther is a very good conversation. There's a lot of different answers, but I'm gonna give you mine, and you can go with it as you want to. First off, either the author is either there at this feast, or they have secondhand knowledge. You know, they're right there at it. You know, I think that's fair. Details of this lavish, exquisite items appears to be firsthand. All scholars would tell you that. For me, there's two human authors, and I'll give you my reasoning behind it. Neither one have been introduced yet, but it's Esther and Mordecai. And my reasoning behind it is because the book of Esther tells me they did. If you want to, you can turn ahead. If you got your highlighter or something, turn ahead to page 36. About halfway down the page, at the end of that paragraph, is it's chapter 9, verse 20. And you can highlight this one because this is a pretty good one. 9:20. It's on page 36. It says, "And Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far." So here we have in the book of Esther the first of two verses which calls out who wrote the information that's being passed on. The other one is on page 38, verse 29. "Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew gave full written authority, confirming this second letter about Purim." So we have two verses contained within, very similar to when we studied John. John explains, you know, I'm the one who wrote this book, you know. So for me, it is Esther and Mordecai. They somewhat tag team this. If you want to say some of the parts are more Mordecai than Esther, that's fine. And if you want to say that, then chapter 1 is Mordecai. He is writing this. He is there. We haven't introduced him yet. We haven't talked about who he is in that world yet, but he is at this scene for sure. He's there in the pavilion in Susa, describing these lavish details. One note on Mordecai for me is that he's skinny. And I like to think of him as being skinny because as he talks about this feast, he's talking about all these, he doesn't talk about the food. I would have said the food first. So, He's a skinny man. That's my thoughts. My own personal thought there. Mordecai, he gives this lengthy catalog of these exotic items: white cotton curtains with violet hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple, to silver rods and marble pillars. The only Old Testament text that's comparable to this description in the details of their surroundings is when in 2 Kings they're talking about Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple is very descriptive. If you were to talk about the tabernacle also, it's very descriptive. But both of those are really just lists. Those are both like inventory lists where he is going into description about these things that are there around him. Couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble mother of pearl and precious stones. An interesting thing, after the Greco-Persian Wars, Alexander the Great, he comes and he destroys Susa. He takes back some of the spoils of war, and they are on display today in London in the British Museum. And among the relics and artifacts are couches of gold and silver and golden, what they call rhytons, but they're cups, they're goblets or chalices. Rhytons, that's a good one if you want to look that up. But these couches of gold and silver are literally on display, 2,500 years old.
Okay, where is this on display at?
This is in the British Museum in London.
Okay.
It's they literally, like right now, have these things on display, which is super cool, super ties together, one thing I'll say about the stones and the different things that are called out here is we're very unsure about what the different things are, because we don't call them that anymore. We know what they are based on the context that they're used in here, but it really much more reads like unsure precious stone, alabaster, unsure precious stone, and so they just kind of say these are precious stones, which is a fair thing. Soharet, which is one of the ones there, it says it's mother of pearl, which is just the closest thing they could come up with. Another translation says black pearl. Black pearl, that's pretty cool. But so most of these items listed are all a best guess because we don't know what they are. None of these terms are still used. They're Persian, so we don't know. One of the things there that the white curtains is a very good one because it translates white stuff. That's what the Hebrew word is. But the translators use curtains because of the context of the verse. They're hangings. They're fastened to these rods on these pillars. They sound like curtains, So that's where it comes from.
I read that Mordecai probably did write that because a woman would put more than just white stuff.
Okay, that's good. That's good. No, that's very good, deep there. That's good. There's many other thoughts of other authors and things like that, but I always go with the most conservative view most of the time, and Mordecai is the conservative view. So, one last note on those descriptors there is a white and violet, or also indigo, whatever you want to call it. They're royal colors, so obviously that's setting the scene. This is the king's banquet. The Persian custom of reclining at the tables, that is what's at this scene. So when he's talking about these couches, they're foreign to him at the time. And the world of Israel does not like this. At this time, we're way before, we're 500 years before Jesus. They don't like this. In Amos 6, Amos says, "Woe to those who lie on beds of ivory and stretch themselves out on their couches and eat lambs from the flock and calves from the midst of the stall." Which is very interesting that all the Jews are against this strange thing, because by the time of Jesus, everybody sits like this at the table. We went into detail. I'm not going to do it because my leg's out today. But how they all recline at the table to sit. Around the triclinium or whatever. I'm not saying these people are sitting around the triclinium. This will be a long banquet hall, but they're all reclining at their own personal couches on one arm, eating with the other hand, drinking, eating, drinking. But by the time of Jesus, everybody does it. But in this context, in here, this is not Jewish. We don't. What do you want me to do? I'm laying down here. This is very strange. And then he gets to the drink menu. He says he calls out the royal wine. He talks about drinking in these golden vessels, which I said goblets or chalices is a good word. And each one of them has a different design. Now, for me, if you're saying every single person at this party has a different designed cup, it's kind of foreign to me because everything's so manufactured for us. Everything that we have, everybody has the same book. When we say everybody has the same book, same pages on every page, you know, that would not have made sense back then. You know, everybody has a unique cup because they're handmade. You know, they're not manufactured through some assembly line. But these are more like drinking horns. Is anybody who's watched any Viking TV, they drink out of some big horn kind of thing. These kind of have like the emblems of animals' faces on them and stuff. It's very cool. You can look up British Museum. They have some of these. They're called rhytons, but they would be very unique. Each one of them is fancy. These are golden, so these are even more fancy than you're thinking. Royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. According to royal rule is another translation there. And again, we're going to go right. It's another Persian word. You know, it's according to, you know, the king's dot is the word, but it's this Persian loan word dot, which means edict. And his edict is there is no compulsion. You're free to drink as little or as much as you like, which is a little bit. This whole sentence right here is a little bit argumentative of itself, contradictory. You're free to drink as little as much as you like. This is not a Scott McCarley edict of BYOB. This is if you want another round, ding the bell, let's go. You know, that's what this is. You know, it's up to you. You know, but the king gave orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. So this is an all-out, no rules party. Anyway, Josephus, he is a historian from the 1st century. He wrote that the Persian rule is when the king drinks, everybody drinks. So you got to keep up. You know, that's the rule. But in this case, they weren't holding to that. They were letting them get away with less. You'd hope after a 7-day party, you know, hey man, take it easy over here. Anyway, the guests could drink as much as they liked. King's orders, with waiters at their elbows to refill the drinks. I like that. That is a Persian thing. Continual wine. It is continually filled. You drink, you set it down, it's filled. There are slaves and servants around the table waiting for you to take a drink so that they can refill it. It's past our knowledge of things, you know. If we even get a refill sometimes at Outback, I mean, you're lucky, you know. Anyway, but so bringing them continual wine, it's the practice of the Persians. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. That's the NIV. I like that translation of verse 8. Meanwhile, as all this is going on, we have our second character being introduced. In verse 9, Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. And her introduction is very much like a footnote to these feasts. I feel like the feasts are the most important thing that he's talking about here. And here's Vashti also. She's got her own. But here we are with another party. You know, that's kind of the way he's talking. There's this third banquet, one thrown by Vashti for the women. So this is a women's only party. This is in the palace of Darius. So out in the yard, out in the pavilion, we have this lavish king's 7-day banquet, and she's throwing her own inside. Inside the palace, while King Ahasuerus is outside the pavilion. It's believed that there's 2 different reasons to have a separate feast, scholarly reasons. One is she had so many women at hers that it would not have been enough room in the other, which is that's a fair guess, you know. The other, which I like more, is the excesses of the king's banquet would have offended the sensibilities of the ladies. The party that is going on outside is so past the point of normalcy, excessive. Everything's too much. Everything out there is just too much to handle.
Is it lit?
It's lit. It's lit. Yeah. Vashti throws her own, and I like to look at it like that. You know, that's the way my view of Vashti, at least. Vashti is a Persian name meaning best or the beloved, the desired one. It's a very lovely name to be known as in the Jewish world. From this point on, it doesn't become a Jewish name, but like they name all their girls Vashti. I mean, it's a very common name, and of course Esther will take the same part. But Anyway, this is her quick introduction there. She has her own party going at the same time. And then it says on the final day, on the seventh day, when the king is lit, he is of good cheer. And there's so many different good translations of this. He's feeling good from the wine is a translation. The Hebrew original is when his heart was good, which is a very, very neat term when you're talking about, the heart of man and all these kind of things. And then you're saying his heart was good. I don't know, it's a little different. But he is in high spirits. The NASB says he is feeling the effects of the wine. He is in this elevated state to no degree. So no question about that. Do what?
Goose is a goose.
There you go. There's another term that should have been in there. I'll put that idiom in there. But on the seventh day of the party, the king, high on the wine, ordered the 7 eunuchs who were his personal servants, and then it names them. Now this part right here for me is very good. For me, this is very good. This is a part like unless you put in some more time and you study deeper, there's just no way to understand what's going on here. The writer uses these 7 Persian names, and 2 of which become characters later in the book. But these 7 names, and the 7 listed that are in verse 14, which we're not going to be able to get to today because I'm talking too long, are transliterations of the most common Persian names. These are the most common. And when I say transliteration, I think Jeff said he talked about transliteration on Wednesday. Anybody? Nobody comes on Wednesday. Anyway, and honestly, my funny thing about it is they're bad transliterations. But first, transliterations are you take this foreign name and you make it a common sounding name in your language. You use some of the alphabet that they use, and you try to keep it as close as you can sometimes, but it's not the same. A couple examples. I'm gonna use Spanish. And as my examples, and then I'm going to transliterate them into English. The Spanish name of Marco in English is Mark. Hello. Alfredo goes to Alfred. The Spanish name Tomas in English is Thomas. So you already see we've kind of adjusted it a little bit. A bigger adjust. Well, you got Diego turns into Doug, Pedro, Peter. But when you talk about a little more of a change, you take the Spanish name Guillermo, which is a very common name. See, that's what I'm talking about. Bonus points. Very good. So the English name is William. So it's Guillermo, William. It's just this. That's what we're going to call them here, type of a name. So imagine that we're telling this story. Imagine I'm intending on being funny here. Telling a story about this time that I went to Mexico. And I tell you about this fiesta that I went to. It was 180 days long. And it is super Hispanic. Everything, the way I'm talking about it, is very, I don't want to use Mexican, I don't think that's the proper name, but it's very culturally Hispanic, And I'm even saying it in a negative way. I'm calling out these different colors that they use. I'm calling out the different foods they eat. And when I say it in my southern accent. So then I've kind of changed it around a little bit. I met some guys, Marco, Alfredo, Tomas, Guillermo, Diego, and Pedro. But as I'm even saying their names, maybe I'm even giving it more of a Jose, not really even close to pronouncing it correctly, putting my own spin and my own negativity on it to some degree. And that's exactly what they do there. And in spelling them, I literally sound them out or misspell them, which is exactly what the author has done here. Scholars say that the mangling or mishandling of these Persian names is intended. Also, some scholars believe that the called out ones, are Jews. And then you're like, well, hold on a second. Now you just said these guys are the most Persian names you can, Well, they've been given new names. As we discussed before in Daniel 1, King Cyrus, he commands Ashpenaz, who's the chief of the eunuchs, to bring the best of the best people of Israel, teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. And among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego, which is a transliteration of their original Hebrew names. So some scholars love to think that these guys, maybe they're even his boys to some degree. They're in with Mordecai. And he's using these names in a negative way because that's not their names. Oh man, I like that. That's pretty good. So we have this super sarcastic tone going on now, if that's the way you read this. Daniel and his friends, which we already discussed, but along with these Persian named guys here at the party are all eunuchs. And eunuchs in 500 BC only means one thing. They've been castrated. They've been castrated to control them. It had been a very common practice when you take over, when you defeat another army, you find the general. You find the toughest hero of that group and you castrate them. It's a very common thing in the ancient world. They don't defile your women. They are controllable. They are, they've lost their ambition. They've lost their life to some degree. They are now, head down, got a hood over themselves. The Hebrew word saris, which is used here, means chief officer / castrate. So I mean, that is their position. So God told the Israelites if they didn't listen. Backing up. An interesting thing about these guys being these eunuchs in this place is that God told them if they didn't listen to them, if they didn't listen to him, that this is what happened. In 2 Kings 20, verse 18, it says, "And some of your own sons who will come from you, whom your father, whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." Again, Isaiah 39, the same thing. He says, if you don't do what I say, your own sons will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs. It's crazy, the exact.
Jewish? That's what you're.
I'm not saying that. Some scholars believe that.
Okay.
They could have just been Persian eunuchs.
Okay.
But a Persian eunuch doesn't mean that he was born Persian. You know what I mean? I like the idea that these are his boys, because we will come back to them later in chapter 3 and chapter 7. Two of them are used as characters. But they're permitted access to this royal harem. And so they can go to the inner courtyard of the ladies. They can enter the powder room. They can enter the ladies' bathroom. There's nobody's safety's in doubt. You know what I mean? Like, they're allowed to be everywhere that normal men are not. In with the queens, in with the concubines, in with the virgins, who are all kept away outside of public eyes. So these names are Hebrewized versions of Uber Persian names. I like that. That's pretty good. If you were to read, there's this Persepolis treasury tablet that has been discovered from this time, and these Persian names are all over it. Like, it is a very common name for us. It would be like John or Bill or Frank. Very common names that are used here. Although when we look at them, we're like, big fuck. Like, these are very strange names. Well, okay, they're Persian names. They didn't make it this far. But they're very Persian names with no Greek influence is another part. These names are very pre-Greek, and that dates Esther itself. It dates the writing of Esther to be before Greek influence. All through the entire thing does. Ahasuerus has spent 10 verses showing off. He has shown off all of his treasures, his abundance, his wealth, his power, and now his climax, his most precious treasure. In verse 11, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with a royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. One translation is she fine.
She's given.
Yeah.
given. Oh, well,
There you go.
I
I'd already forgot that one. That's good. He wants Vashti to parade naked before the partiers. That is the understanding of that verse. To come out only wearing her royal crown.
I missed the naked part.
Yes,
But I
know.
knew that's how, but does it
It's
say
lost
that?
on us.
No, it doesn't say it.
It doesn't say it the way we read it. In our translation, it's to get the point across that she was asked to come out with her crown, and then she refused.
Yeah, so we'll know.
Traditional Jewish interpretation understands that this is to mean that Vashti was to appear wearing nothing but the crown. Do I? Yes.
She shot.
She that's what he asks of her. And in this setup, for me, I mean, it's too much. Everything he's doing is too much. It's success. And here he is continuing that with his request of his queen. There's this carnival type atmosphere I like. Everything's just too much. You know, you just have the drink is too much. The food is probably too much. Although there's this beautiful scenery, we're surrounded in lavish, you know, golden things. Everything is too much. He tells all 7 of the eunuchs to go get her. So, for me, he might not have expected her to say yes. It's a good interpretation of that. Why would you send 7 men to go get 1 woman? He may not have expected her to come. He may have expected her to put up a fight. You know, maybe it says something about her character. We're given such a small introduction to her. We have to kind of pick apart the details to figure it out. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. At this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. And for me, to say no to the king is death. That's a quick translation. She is choosing death rather than coming out.
That's another woman moment.
There you go. We're gonna have a whole book of them here. You know? Yep. Woman. Better get out here. That crown. Yeah. They deliver. The 7 eunuchs. They come. They deliver this direct command from the king, straight from his mouth, straight to you. And this is before women's rights. This is before any of the ideas that you have in your head of equality. Any of them, no matter how one side or the other they are. This is before all that. This is way before that. They're you know, secluded. They're kept by themselves. If you were taught to read at this point, you were a queen. You know, but she refuses. Now, on one hand, Jewish readers would have been pulling for her to stand up against all this craziness, all these alien, foreign things. Yeah, Vashti, that's what I'm talking about. You know, you go, girl. Her refusal would have been understandable, but for strict Jewish understanding, this would have been humiliating to her husband. This would have been humiliating to her own family. This would have been a public disobedience. So it is a very tough passage for a conservative Jewish person in the early, you know, the late BCs to take in, you know, because although she is doing the right thing, publicly she's not, you know. So it's a very tough verse. For us, her refusal is not a tough verse. You know, it is a, you know, let's go. You know, that's what I'm talking about. If that's hate, and that's what happens. You know. So it is Jewish tradition that she was equally beautiful to Esther. But here's a good one. Talking about her beauty, it calls it out specifically. He uses half a verse there to talk about that she was good looking. There's a minority view that has always been that the reason why he calls her out like that, and the reason why she won't come out, is because there's a level of disfigurement on her body. There's no way that she would come out naked. Whether it's, you know, through whatever you want to say, you know, through it's, you know, she's had 10 children at this point. We don't know, you know, whether it's this or that or all these, she's not coming out naked. And there is this minority view that it's because of some personal reason that she doesn't come out. It's not like a choice. She's just standing up for herself. It's more of like, I could never go in public naked type of choice. Either way, though, she is a hero. She's an icon to Jewish girls. She is this independent thinker who stands up for herself when it could cost her life. Of course, Vashti is one of the most popular Jewish names in the last 2,500 years. Victor Matthews says, Xerxes would be requesting Vashti to do something beneath her station and demeaning to her royal parsonage. And I think that's another way of looking at it. If you look at yourself as a queen, then there's no way you're going to stoop down to this. Harriet Beecher Stowe called Vashti's disobedience the first stand for women's rights. Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote that Vashti added a new glory to her day and generation by her disobedience. For resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. And of course, it doesn't call out her faith or anything like that, you know, but Adele Burns said, "Without Vashti, there would be no Esther." Vashti's point of view is never given, which is it's true. You know, she doesn't have a chance, an opportunity to explain herself. So we just assume. I like the the Message translation of verse 11 says he wanted to show off the beauty. To bring him Queen Vashti resplendent in her royal crown. He wanted to show off her beauty to the guests and officials. She was extremely good looking. I like that one. But no, it's something. Her stand against him, and then we see the result. But when
It's
Queen
really
Vashti,
unbelievable, because it is dead.
it is
I
death.
mean-
It's death right then. Yeah, like
Yeah.
you're not coming out. You're not the next day. You're not alive really. Because as the King of Kings and the ruler of heroes, you can get another queen the next day, and so he will. No, but you know, but when Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's bidding, conveyed through the eunuchs, then the king became extremely angry, and his rage consumed him. Man, that's an awesome ending, I think. So we're going to leave that with his angry outburst, and we'll pick up there next week. The aftermath of Vashti's refusal as the king is avenged. So if you want, in your own private time, we've got 9 remaining verses in chapter 1. I suggest reading the whole book just every single week. Man, for me, I love to read something and then I love to find out what I'm at. Oh man, that makes so much more sense now, you know? I'm gonna pick on Mark because he's not here, but one of my favorite things about chapter 1 is it's just full, and chapter 2, it's just full of these satirical humor. You know, there's a comedy throughout the whole thing, but man, it's just laced with just dark sarcasm and wit. And I told him that, you know, and he's like, "Man, I've read that book like 4 times now, and I do not see that." You know, just since we talked about it like a couple months ago, he's like, "I don't see it anywhere." And I was like, "All right, you will. You know, calm down." But it is just through the whole thing. There's this taste for that world and us and them. You know, we don't want any part of the these royal splendor and pomp. If you can't read royal splendor and pomp and not know that it's a little sarcastic. I mean, it's a little sarcastic. But so we'll pick up there next week. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on Vashti's refusal?
So she was the start of women's rights to vote. Oh,
If you want to say
man,
that, that's fine.
It started a long
She is an
time
early
ago.
influence on standing up for yourself as a woman. I'll say that. Yeah. This would have been super foreign to everyone at this point. This story should stand out as like, you had me. I was believing it up till now. You know, like that would have been what you would have said at this point, because it's just so.
Well, she's standing up, did she say, "Oh, he's wrong"?
Maybe. Yes, no, that's exactly right. I don't think that she doesn't even make an appearance, but I wish there was some verses where she spoke. You know, anyway. But anyway.
I
It
feel
was the
like it
ultimate
could-
insult to the king.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I feel like she took it as an insult to her because
Yeah.
it's bringing her down to the level of concubines and.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Is this
absolutely.
something that he would do often, or is he doing it because he's
Okay.
drunk?
Now, I read this one thing. That's a very
That's
good
a
question.
good question.
Had this happened at the 180-day feast, is this the way he ends feasts? Was she not with him for 180 days? Surely she would have been, you know? So she would have been present at the first party for sure. Now, whether this was asked of her or anything, we don't know. But we do see this as he continuing in his excessive showing. Here's my treasures from here. Yeah, that's another thing I didn't mention, but like, as we talk about these different precious stones, they would have been found from all over. You know, so I got this from here, I got this from here. Oh, look at the great things I got from here. And then check out my queen, you know, that kind of thing.
He's showing off.
And he's showing
It's
off.
all pride, like.
It's
yeah.
all pride, arrogance,
Mhm.
too much is my favorite summation of it all. It's just-
I bet she's sick of him partying for 180 days. She's like, I'm tired of him.
It's a very difficult thing. Did she stay to her quarters for 180 days? Was he in there for 180 days? I don't know. It's such a humongous number, you know. I even like to look at it like, and this is a little more of a progressive statement, but let's just say the 180 days was a generalization. It was a very long party, you know. Even if it's a very long party that lasted what seemed to be half a year, she still would have been involved in some way. She still would have been in there. I would think, you know. Ignore that statement. But I'm just saying, just generally, you know, it seemed like it was half a year.
She was probably over it by then.
Yeah. How many of these parties we're gonna have? But at the same time, she throws one. So like, what's going on? It's just,
That's what I was wondering, what did she do at her feast? I mean, what's going on? Cause it, like, the guys are obviously being excessive with whatever they do. They don't really give a description.
They're just
Quiet.
socializing.
That's what
I
I'm
was gonna say, so the guys over here drinking wine, or are they over there soda?
another thing that is a unique thing is, as the king of the world, he would have had, you know, campaigns that he would went on militarily. Of course, he doesn't during this period. He's about to, though, right after in chapter 2. But he would have been judging things. He would have had things he would have had to do, day-to-day jobs he would have had to do that he doesn't do. So nothing's getting done during this entire extended party. So it's a very strange time. Oh, Washington D.C. That's good. That's fine. That's fine. Okay. One thing we'll keep in mind that I'll stress is, you know, he gives this edict of, you know, whatever you want to some degree. But this whole book is banquets and edict, banquets and laws. That's like the whole king's laws. That's some of the underlying most important things to keep up with as we go through it. So we have our themes laid out right there in the first 13 verses. So very good. Anybody got any other thoughts or anything? This Friday night at 7 at the McCarley's, we're going to start a 180-day party. It's just food.
First couple allowed us.
I was gonna say, you don't want to be there.
Then we're definitely going to go there. All right.
I'll leave the loud on.
Thank you. Very good.
Under the mat.
All right, so we'll have a prayer real quick before we dismiss for service. Anybody have any prayer requests or praise reports? Things going on?
My cousin already did last night.
I have a praise report. My tumor came back benign.
Yes.
Thank God for that.
Yes. Oh, that's terrific.
There's a lady at the facility that, she can't see out, she's totally blind in one eye, and she can't see get out of the other one. And I remember her.
What was her name?
Miss Matthews.
Very good. So we'll all keep those in mind as we pray and we'll dismiss. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for helping us to set this time aside in our busy weeks. This time that we have, you know, to focus on your word. We ask that you continue to draw us closer to you as you reveal yourself through the words that you've placed in the text just for us. Bless our service. Bless these different needs that we discussed, and thank you for all the things that you've helped us with. We ask that you watch over our service this morning and bless it. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Who done it?
My cousin.
Okay.
You're lenient.
Yeah, you're leaving.
And his daddy shot.
Hey, Wes?
Yes, sir.
There's an accident on.
$2.
You need
They
to straighten
were-
up
I know
and-
Stan said that
Let's straighten her up.
I mean, they.
That's
Straighten her up, get her to sit
Tell you what,
right.
the socks are comfy.
Here's one of them.
I got the other. How you doing?
Whose son is he?
Hey, I think we got it.
No,
No?
no, they can pull from this side.
Need to pull from this side?
The one guy that's still in front of the car, he had a yard store out there today.
That's good.
That's better?
And he was doing good. He opened up like his motorcycle shop, like back in the year.
No problem at all.
Hey, how many children did Andrew have? So
Well, you look straighter anyway.
I do, I feel straight.
If they don't get you in there straight,
It makes you hurt you. He'll
Yes,
take you
because then you're there and you're trying to hold,
Mine
this
is.
is what.
yeah.
And then Tony was married to Kim, they have Rodney.
So, Katie's married to Keisha.